In this video, I'm going to do a comparison between the Kuat Envy 2.0 bike rack and the Saris MTR. And just as important, and maybe more important for you, I'm going to talk about the different clamping styles of these bike racks because they're the two most popular clamping styles today. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you which one I prefer and why. Before we get further into the video, I want to thank Rack Attack for sending me these bike racks to review and compare. We're going to start with the Kuat Envy 2.0, and I just want to say both of these bike racks are really high quality. They're really well made. They both have pluses and minuses, which I'll cover in this video. I'll start with how the rack mounts to the vehicle. So for this rack, you just slide it into the hitch receiver and line up the holes. You can see that the pin moves back and forth freely. There are no threads. There is a lock that you can just slide onto the pin, and that will lock the bike rack onto the vehicle. Once the pin is in, you're just going to turn this knob, and I actually prefer this over the Saris MTR, which I'll show because this is really easy. The rack drops down just by putting your foot on this lever, and it's a super smooth operation. To mount a bike on the Kuat, you're just going to extend this arm, put it out of the way, undo the wheel strap, and this is where these bike racks really start to differ, is the clamping style. Now for this bike rack, as long as the wheels are at least a 26-inch wheel or bigger, there are no attachments or anything that you need to add to the rack. Really no adjusting you have to do, which I'll show you on the Saris. We do have to make some adjustments for some different wheel sizes. So for this one, you just push this down, lock it into place. Now, to make it most secure, you do want there to be little to no gap between the fork and this clamping arm. And this is where these bike racks differ, is this one pretty much doesn't touch the frame, except for this can touch the fork. What I like to do for mountain bikes is I do like to leave maybe ½ an inch so that the arm does not touch the fork and rub the paint. It's easier to do on a mountain bike because of the knobby tires. Now the problem with this is if you're on the interstate or whatever and the bike really starts moving around, this can work itself closer to the fork, touch the fork, and then you've got a little more play than you would really like to have for this bike rack. So that's the downside. Now let's mount a second bike onto this rack. Now of course you can see I have this set up as a 4-bike rack, and I'm going to talk about that coming up here in a minute. On this rack, you've got to make sure you do the wheel straps. If you don't do the wheel straps on this rack, the wheel is going to move sideways and the bike's going to fall down. So very important that you do the wheel straps on the Kuat. Now as a 2-bike rack, the Kuat is great because what you can do is you can lower these trays down. So these trays have 3 positions. This is all the way down. You can do a middle position and then a higher position. I keep the first 2 position trays, number 1, number 2, in the low position. So I drop both of these down, and what that does is it moves the bike forward so the handlebars and the saddle do not make contact. As a 4-bike rack, that's where I start to have some issues with the Kuat. Now I've used this one a lot as a 4-bike rack, and the problem is you've really got to position these trays in the exact position to get the handlebars and the saddles to not make contact. Now it does help if the bikes have a dropper seat post, so you can lower the saddle and keep the handlebars from contacting the saddle. The problem is the handlebars of the 3rd bike can contact the handlebars of the 1st bike and the 2nd and the 4th, and so that can be a little bit of an issue. Now I will say one thing I like about this rack as a 4-bike rack is how easy it converts. So these last 2 trays are an add-on. All you have to do to convert this from a 2-bike to a 4-bike or a 4-bike back to a 2-bike is take off the trail dock. So we're going to remove this by doing a quick release, then undo this plate. And then you've got 2 bolts up inside there that you undo with an 8mm Allen wrench, and it really takes about 3 minutes to make the conversion. So I've added a 3rd bike, and you can see what I mean by the handlebars making contact. So currently right now, those handlebars contact. What I can do is I can lower this tray. The problem with lowering the tray is you can get the saddles to make contact with the 2nd and the 3rd bike. Now this is a dirt jumper, so the saddle's super low. I've had times where I've just either removed the saddle, the seat post from the bike, or really just turn it sideways to keep those from contacting. So again, it's kind of like a puzzle with this rack because with each of these front wheel holders having 3 positions, That's like hundreds of combinations that you can do with where you position the bike and where you position those trays. So it does take time to get this right as a forward bike rack, and it's probably my least favorite feature of the Kuat. I do like the locks on the Kuat because they're on the outside. I'll show you with the Saris, they're in the middle, so you have to reach between the bikes to get to it. With this one, they're on the outside, so you can slide this out. And this will emphasize what I mean by this bike rack being really smooth. These locks just slide in and out so easily. You can feel just how well it's made. I've had some bike racks where the locks are really hard to get in and out, particularly back in. So this one extends pretty far. You've got a pretty good amount of cable, and then all you do is just loop it around the frame or whatever, and then lock it into place. And that way, this bike is secure, and it's really easy to get to the other bikes. So if I wanted to get to this bike, I can easily slide that out. I don't have to reach in the middle between all the bikes, and then I can lock up this one just like I did the other one. Another thing that I like about the locks on the Kuat is, let's say you only have one bike, but you want to make it really secure. So let's say this was your only bike on the rack. What you could do is you could actually pull this lock out, and you could lock up the frame or put it through the front wheel, and that way the bike is more secure. And I'll just say that any of these bike racks are not designed to really lock up your bikes overnight like at a hotel. Another thing that's worth mentioning about these locks is you only need the key to unlock it and to put the cables back in the trays. It's, again, really smooth. All you do is just slide that in, and then this kind of locks into place. It doesn't jiggle out. I've added a fourth bike, and what I've done is I've lowered that front tray all the way down, and I still have contact up here. So now, instead of the handlebar grips touching each other, this grip is touching this brake lever. And to me, that would be a problem on the interstate. I would not want to drive a long trip and have this rubbing. So probably what I would do is loosen the stem bolts, kind of turn the handlebar sideways a little bit to keep those from contacting. Now we're going to add a 20-inch BMX bike, and I'll show you what you have to do, because this arm will only go down to a 26er mountain bike. That's the smallest wheel size you can carry without getting this adapter. So this thing costs, I don't know, 20 bucks or so. It's pretty quick and easy to install. And as I'll show you on the Saris, it's quicker to put a BMX bike on this bike rack, and it's 24 or 26. You have to use this adapter. So all you have to do is slide this up in there and then use the Velcro straps to put it on. Now I realize a lot of you out there just ride road and mountain, and this would not apply to you unless you have kids or if you ride BMX like my son and I do. So you saw how quick that was? Took 10 seconds to put on. So you just bring the arm down. Now this is a little loose. I wish it were a little bit better. You really have to make sure this thing comes all the way up to the fork. And what I do is I put a little rag between the adapter and the fork so I can make sure it doesn't rub the fork. To fold this bike rack up, all you do is reach in, grab this lever, and it locks into place really well. Sits pretty close to the vehicle, as does the Saris. They're both have a nice profile once they're up against the car. Before we move to the Saris bike rack, we have to talk about one of my favorite features of the Kuat, and that is the trail dock, which is basically an integrated work stand. And then you would just mount the bike in here with the seat post usually. Just turn this down, and you've got a work stand at the trailhead or at your cabin or wherever. All right, now let's move to the Saris. The Saris slides into the hitch receiver just like the Kuat. One thing I like about the MTR is it's got this pin that makes contact with your hitch receiver for the next time you put it on, so the hole is perfectly lined up. The Saris holds secure in your hitch receiver with a threaded pin, unlike the Kuat, which had the knob on the outside that you turn. This one, you have to put the pin in and then you thread it. Now, normally this would be really easy, but on my car, I've got this flap and this hits, so it takes a minute or so to get this in and secure. So I actually prefer that on the Kuat. Again, that's just my vehicle, but the knob is a quicker install versus turning this thing. And this one also has a lock to lock it onto your vehicle. You can see that the trays on the Saris fold up, which really makes it nice for storing in your garage. You can just put it in a corner like this, and it's really nice for limited storage. So we're gonna drop these down. To lower the rack, you just pull up on this handle. You can do it with one hand. Also really smooth operation, just like the Kuat. Another nice thing about these versus the Kuat is since they pivot and you want to get into the back of your car, so if you have a hatchback, you can easily get in and kind of stand here and load stuff and kind of get the trays out of the way, which you cannot do on the Kuat. We're gonna mount a bike, and I really like how you can do these trays with one hand. So all you have to do is pull this button and you can move the trays. Mounting a bike on the Saris, I think, is a little bit easier because of how easy these arms are to get out of the way, and then you just push them in. And you wanna make sure the front tire touches this wheel block, and then you push that into place. There is a Velcro wheel strap that Saris includes that I really only use if I'm going on the interstate. If I'm just going back and forth to the trailhead or to work, I don't really worry about it. What I really like about this design, and there are of course other bike rack companies that do this, namely One Up USA, which is I think the first company to do this type of design. Nothing touches the frame at all. There is no contact, there is no rubbing, there is not the issue of, you know, with the Kuat, trying to keep the arm away from the fork, but then having it move over towards it. So this is my favorite design now that I've been using this bike rack for a while. Now we'll mount a second bike, and this is what I mean about having these arms only using one hand. So I've got a bike in my one hand. I just want to lift up that arm and get it out of the way. Same thing with this one. You always want to do the front wheel first, and it'll hold into place because of this wheel block. It'll hold into place without you having to keep another hand on the bike. Secure this, and it's really locked into place. Again, nothing touching the frame. So you can see how stepped up the second tray is versus the front one, and that really prevents bikes from making contact with each other. Since this is an enduro bike, I have the seat post down because it has a dropper seat post, as most mountain bikes do today, and that really keeps things from touching. So plenty of clearance. Let's put on another traditional mountain bike and see how the clearance is. No issue with clearance here either because the bikes are really forward. So this bike is over to the right, and the blue bike over here, the Transition Patrol, is more over to the left side. And so that also keeps the bikes offset and keeps them from touching each other. Now the downside to this rack compared to the Kuat is how long it would take to convert this to a 4-bike rack. Now I don't have the add-on to make it a 3 or 4 bike rack, but I went on Saris's website and I counted there is about 12 different bolts that you have to turn, and you have to put in a little plate on each side, and you have to remove the handle. And so my estimation is it would probably take you 15 minutes to convert this, which isn't the end of the world. But if you're like me and you're using it as a 2-bike rack during the week, and for trips or maybe on a weekend you want to convert it to a 4-bike rack, the Kuat is a lot more practical if you're doing that. Let's talk about how the locks work on this bike rack. Now it's nice that you have integrated locks, which some bike racks you don't, but I totally prefer the Kuat. But what you do is you turn these, pull them out, and you put them around the frame and join them together. And one downside is these are pretty short, and sometimes it is hard to get them around the frame, and you're doing it around the chain ring, which means you can easily get grease on your arm, even on the locking cable, on your shirt. The other downside is you have to use the key to lock these. So this will not go in if I don't turn the key. So I have to put the key in. Remember with the Kuat, you could just stick it in there and it would lock, and you only had to have the key, of course, to unlock it. So this, you join these two together, turn the key, and they're locked. The other downside is if I only had one bike on the rack, I couldn't use both locks to make the bike more secure like I could do on the Kuat bike rack. Let's talk about putting a smaller wheel bike on this rack. For example, a 24 or 20-inch BMX bike or smaller. The nice thing about this rack is you don't need any special adapters. The downside is it takes longer. What you have to do is you have to reposition these. Now this bike rack does come with an integrated Allen wrench. What you have to do is you have to turn this, and what I found is the front wheel needs to be in this position that's second from the bottom for a BMX bike. This is what it looks like with a BMX bike installed. Now, even though Saris says to use this position for a 20-inch, this one works a lot better. They say to use this one for a 24, but I found that second position works better even for a 20-inch. And then they also say to use this position, but it would not work. So I actually leave it in this position. Even in this one, the way it contacts the wheel isn't secure enough. But doing it like this makes carrying a 20 or 24-inch, I use the same position for both because I have a cruiser, a 24, but the bike is super secure in there. So, you know, the only downside is you have to use a tool to reposition those. I wish Saris would have made that a quick release. For weight limit for these racks, you can carry bikes up to 60 pounds on the first two positions for both the Kuat and the Saris MTR, so you can carry e-bikes. For the second two positions, the Saris, I believe, is 35 pounds for each, and then the Kuat is 50 pounds for the third bike, and I think they say 40 pounds for the fourth bike. Price-wise, they're about the same. They're around the $800 range. I know prices can vary depending on sale, so I'm not going to quote you a price on this. But for the Saris and the Kuat Envy 2.0, the two bike racks are about the same, and I think the two bike add-ons for both are about the same price, but you can get online and check prices on various websites to include Rack Attack. Which clamping style do I prefer? This one, by far, if you can't tell. I just love the fact that nothing touches the frame. So even though there's issues with the locking mechanism with this rack and adjusting it for BMX bikes takes a little bit longer, this is hands down the best two bike rack I've ever used, and I've used a lot of them. I still like the Kuat. I like how solid it is. I like how easy it is to convert that from a 2 to a 4 and back to a 2. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If I missed anything about these racks, leave that in the comments below along with any other questions or comments. Thanks for watching.